The 21st century has already passed nearly a quarter. For human society, the most important question in this century is clearly how far American hegemony has gone, and how much further it can go. In the last century, the hegemony of the British Empire came to an end during the two world wars. Today, there are already two significant wars happening in the world, one in Eastern Europe and one in the Middle East. However, purely based on scale, these two regional wars don't seem enough to complete the historical task of ending American hegemony. If these two countries, involved in the wars, switched places in history, and British Prime Minister Chamberlain or Akiyama would be a general, though the name might refer to a similar strategic figure in history, were solving the problems America faces today, they might think that the two ongoing wars are not very serious crises. Historically, the threats posed to British hegemony by Napoleon's French Empire, Catherine's Russian Empire, and the German Empire after Bismarck were far more severe. In fact, if we switch to the perspective of early 20th century European politicians, the wars in Europe and Paris likely shouldn't have happened. As the leading rival of the Western free world, Russia's demand is simply that NATO's guns don't appear directly on its long western border. Such a humble request is hardly fitting for its role as the big villain, and the Middle Eastern turmoil involving Saudi Arabia and Iran is just a means to get the US to lift economic sanctions and allow normal trade with other countries. Strangely, the US is unwilling to compromise even on such demands, choosing instead to take a hardline approach, as if retreating even one step would cause the entire hegemonic order to collapse. If the British Empire's hegemonic order was like a structure of building blocks, maintained by extensive compromise and interest exchange among powerful nations across different regions, then America has created a fragile domino-like structure, where even minor disturbances in distant regions can trigger a cascading collapse. It can be said that in this structure, America's need for immigrants is very high, and its resistance to failure is very weak. Understanding this characteristic is crucial for judging the stage of American hegemony and the crazy actions it might take. So, how did America evolve into this state? Before understanding America's nature, let's first talk about the term empire. One could say that Chinese people have a significant misunderstanding of this word because empire is a typical foreign concept. Not all countries ruled by an emperor are called empires in the literal sense. In Western cultural contexts, the meaning of the word empire is deeply influenced by the Roman Empire. Since the late Middle Ages, Europeans often referred to vast nations similar to the Roman Empire as empires. Early Western missionaries who came to China also habitually referred to the Central Plains dynasty, then ruling China, as an empire. But in fact, the key to distinguishing whether a country is an empire is not its vast territory or large population. For instance, the so-called Carthaginian Empire that once confronted the Roman Empire primarily consisted of a single commercial city located near modern Tunisia. An empire doesn't necessarily have to have an emperor. Carthage, before its destruction, was ruled by a council-like institution similar to a senate. In Western historical contexts, empire actually refers to a mode of governance established through land or sea expansion that differentiates between a center and periphery, using plunder from peripheral regions to supplement the central region. In ancient China, the Central Plains dynasties certainly distinguished between the center and the periphery, but the Central Plains dynasties did not rely on plundering peripheral regions for survival. On the contrary, for the sake of border stability, the Central Plains dynasties often used wealth collected from the central region to subsidize peripheral regions. It can be said that in terms of the relationship between the center and the periphery, the governance logic of ancient Chinese dynasties was actually diametrically opposed to that of Western empires. Understanding this point makes it clear how much of a misunderstanding it is to use the Western term empire to describe the ancient Central Plains dynasties. In ancient China, the Central Plains actually referred to the most fertile, highest producing core farming area of the East Asian continent, which was also the center of dynastic rule. The regimes in peripheral regions were referred to as barbarian lands, and their highest ideal was to enter and rule the Central Plains, competing for the productivity center of this continent. Once a regime successfully occupied this central region, its governance logic would shift from offense to defense. This is what Confucius referred to in the Spring and Autumn Annals when he said that when barbarians enter China, they become Chinese, reflecting a transformation not only in cultural customs but also in the governance and ruling mode of the regime. After occupying the wealthiest Central Plains, a regime's governance approach shifts from conquest to preservation. Therefore, at the beginning of the establishment of a Central Plains dynasty, it often needs to make significant adjustments to its internal management system. This is what Confucian scholars refer to in advising Han Gaozi Lu Bang, saying, "You can conquer the world on horseback, but you cannot rule it on horseback. These major adjustments often included weakening the military system and transforming the originally offensive army into a defensive homeland force. At this point, the Central Plains dynasty no longer needed external expansion. For the Central Plains dynasties, it was clearly more cost-effective to maintain stability in the peripheral regions through marriage alliances and tributes, rather than through expansion. In essence, this was a governance logic of using the wealth of the civilized central region to subsidize the peripheral regions, something unimaginable in Western imperial systems, where the peripheral regions were meant to be plundered for the center's benefit. In the Western imperial system, the barbarians living in peripheral regions did not have the qualifications to be empire citizens and were born to serve the civilized people living in the center. The Western imperial system is highly dependent on external expansion and the plundering of peripheral regions. Its ruling philosophy is to conquer the world on horseback and continue to rule it on horseback. To sustain ongoing plunder from peripheral regions, an empire needs to maintain an offensive military system, and as the world's hegemonic empire, it must always maintain a size and technological advantage over the peripheral nations. Only in this way can the empire use force at any time during crises to maintain stability in the center by controlling the peripheral areas. Historically, the birth of the United States is the most direct and purest product of this imperial expansion system. In 1898, it is said that after a painful night of prayer in a Christian church, U.S. President William McKinley made a decision to annex the Philippines, claiming that God had guided him to annex these islands because returning them to Spain would seem cowardly and dishonorable, giving them to other empires would be negligent and untrustworthy, and allowing them to be independent would be irresponsible because the Filipinos were unfit for self-rule. Therefore, the only solution was to annex all the islands, educate the Filipinos, improve their education, convert them to Christianity, and make them children of God. So, how did the U.S. later lead the Filipinos? It is said that to suppress the local resistance, the U.S. military adopted an unwritten rule. For every American harmed by the locals, 15 Filipinos would be killed as a warning. One of the U.S. military commanders stationed in the Philippines was Arthur MacArthur, the father of the later Japanese emperors Marshal, Douglas MacArthur. The mention of the Philippines here is to illustrate how the imperial cultural system provided a rich arsenal of ideological tools for expansion and plundering peripheral regions. These people, the Americans, held such beliefs not because they were bad people. Quite the opposite. President McKinley was a devout Methodist from a young age. In their daily lives, they were polite and courteous, pillars of American society. Were there people in America who opposed the annexation of the Philippines? There were, indeed, and some of them were quite influential figures, like Senator John Sherman and former President Cleveland. But their reasons and motives for opposition were rarely moral. Some feared that introducing inferior races would pollute the American population, while others worried that America would need to maintain a large army as a result, and be unable to cope with complex international alliances. Historically and culturally, America's imperialist tendencies have always been more pure compared to Britain, because the U.S. itself is a product of British imperialism, having split off from it. Before engaging in imperialism, Britain had a long history of being a peripheral region itself. Over 1,000 years, Britain was successively conquered by Romans, Normans, and Germanic peoples, and learned how to survive as a barbarian fringe power. After becoming an empire, these painful historical memories turned into political experience that wasn't entirely useless. The rulers of the British Empire could at least understand the psychology of the weaker side and knew how not to push the defeated into a corner. Otherwise, they might pay a greater price for it. They understood when to compromise with their opponents, instead of taking all the benefits and leaving no room. The U.S., however, has no such historical experience. From the start of the 13 colonies in North America, white settlers expanded westward by seizing land from Native Americans, and they hardly ever encountered significant obstacles. During the period of territorial expansion, America coincided with a time when European powers were most intensely engaged in internal conflict, and major European powers rarely wanted to invest much effort in North America. Napoleon's empire, in its struggle for supremacy with Britain, almost gave away Louisiana to the U.S. for free. Britain shifted its colonial focus to the rich and easily governed Indian subcontinent and was busy containing the traditional continental powers of Europe. The old empires of Spain and Portugal, which valued the Americas, were in decline. These factors combined to allow America to expand its territory with exceptional ease. However, this overly smooth situation also deprived America of the opportunity to hone its political experience. Domestically, when conflicts of interest arose, they expanded westward, turning Native American lands into their own, and domestic conflicts eased. When conflicts re-emerged, they expanded again, internationally. Before stepping out of the Americas and abandoning the Monroe Doctrine, the U.S. rarely intervened in international affairs and lacked experience in dealing with countries of equal power or making compromises. Soon after stepping out of the Americas, the U.S. suddenly found that its power was already unmatched, with no real rivals in sight. The Soviet Union, which could barely be considered a rival, mysteriously collapsed on its own. The U.S. won without fighting. If you were to rewrite America's entire history into a novel, even the most extreme web novel would pale in comparison. How could the Americans living within it not believe that they are truly a nation blessed by destiny, chosen by a mysterious God? However, the protagonists in web novels often lack political acumen because their growth experiences never required them to use it. Even more dangerously, America, with the help of internet technology and modern financial tools, has tightly connected the entire world, becoming the first truly global empire in the true sense. On August 12th, news came out from Iran that a former foreign minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif, who had just been appointed as vice president, announced on Twitter that he had resigned from his position because his child held U.S. citizenship in a country that has been sanctioned by the U.S. for decades and has repeatedly been listed as a rogue state by the U.S. The fact that such a person could initially be appointed as the nation's vice president shows just how powerful the forces of a globalized empire are. And this former vice president chose to announce this matter on Twitter, likely because he felt wronged and wanted to find a place to air his grievances, hoping that public opinion would sympathize with him. He likely already received the comfort he sought. In a country that has long been hostile to the U.S., it is no surprise that similar cases of high-ranking officials holding dual citizenship can be found in European countries. This is the world we now live in, a deeply globalized system. Its first characteristic is that many people have a loyalty to the world order that surpasses their loyalty to their country and nation, and they see this as natural. These people are spread across politics, business, and culture, forming a vast global comprador system that assists the empire in plundering peripheral regions. They call themselves global citizens and view issues from a Mars perspective. Their highest ideal is to enter the center of the empire, shedding their identity as barbarians and becoming part of the civilized people. The economic foundation supporting their status as compradors is a highly financialized economy centered on the US dollar. With the help of modern technology, there are various financial tools that can easily securitize assets and trade them globally in real time, greatly facilitating the cross-border flow of wealth. The central and peripheral regions of the empire are also linked by such a financial system. The plundering of peripheral regions by the central regions is more often conducted in the form of financial wars. This modern financial plundering system is highly efficient, but it also accumulates risks at a much faster pace than in the industrial era. Essentially, this is because capital's desire for value appreciation has no limit. The more efficient and ingenious the plundering system, the greater its appetite becomes. In the 2008 financial crisis, we already saw the speed of innovation in American financial products, the complexity of product design, from basic products to derivatives at various levels, the layers upon layers, dazzlingly intricate, and at every level, leverage could be added, exponentially magnifying the risk. Finally, when everything spiraled out of control, America used its financial dominance to make the whole world pay for the risks it had created. However, everything has a price. The maintenance cost of such a complex and sophisticated plundering machine is extremely high. As the financial black hole created by the US grows larger, the risks the world needs to absorb increase accordingly. America's capacity to suppress the globe must also grow in tandem. This suppression is not only directed at America's enemies, but also at its allies. The so-called American allies are just closer to the center region. They are actually also targets of the empire's plundering. In fact, because they are closer to the empire's center, the economic ties are even stronger, and the comprador system is more developed. In times of crisis, these so-called allies can be seen as emergency rations for the empire. To further elaborate, the empire needs an enemy, and it must suppress this enemy without compromise or mercy. Its fundamental purpose is to demonstrate to the global comprador system that it still has full control over the world. Once America shows signs of decline, the global comprador system it has built is at risk of collapsing. This is the most fatal threat to the empire. Back in the day, the British Empire's enemies were real and posed a genuine threat to its hegemony. To maintain its hegemony, Britain could either confront them or compromise with them, adhering to the principle that there are no eternal allies or enemies, only eternal interests. But today, America's enemy is a concept, a symbolic representation of the American people's divine destiny, akin to the opposition between God and Satan. For a conceptual enemy, there can never be any compromise. In fact, no country initially wanted to be America's enemy. They all once tried to integrate into the West, hoping to become part of the civilized world. However, the capacity of the civilized center is limited. If everyone enters the center, who will be the peripheral regions or the targets of plunder for the civilized world? A Soviet writer, Kirillov, once proposed a concept called the Golden Billion, meaning that the modern world order can only accommodate around 1 billion people living a decent life in the Western world. Our country alone has 1.4 billion people. This numerical comparison destined that the current civilization would not accept us. However, the Earth is round, and the distinction between the center and the periphery is relative. No one has dictated that the place where we stand cannot become the center. If you're enjoying the content, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us create more videos like this, so don't forget to turn on the notification bell to stay updated with our latest uploads. Thanks for watching.